Alright, gonna watch some House of Dragon. Just press play. Probably should check my last video, see how it's doing. 50,000 views? I better get started on my next build. What to make? Let me think. Yeah, you know what? That might work.
Hey there, my name's Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. Nope, that's not me. My name's Adam and I'm your unexceptional craftsman for this build. I've been a big fan of Game of Thrones since it came out, and it's pretty common for me to be having a nice glass of Mountain Dew or sweet tea while I enjoy my favorite show, but I noticed that in the show they tend to do it with goblets. Fancy goblets. And so I figured I'd make my own. I'm going to start this by creating a wire armature and the shape of what I'm going for eventually. Currently it looks like a chicken, and then I'm going to add some clay. Now if you notice, I'm doing this around this plastic cup. I needed something to sculpt around to give myself a platform on which to start and something to guide the overall structure. Once I have the wire armature the way I want it to be, then I'm going to start layering on some clay to give it some thickness. A lot of people tend to use tinfoil to do this, but I figured I'd just go straight with clay because I really wanted there to be a lot of support and strength in this as I'll be picking it up and using it, and I didn't want the internal tinfoil to cause any weakness. It may not, but I'm just not sure. So here we are. If it's not obvious yet, and it may not be, I'm sculpting a dragon. And I want this dragon to be clutching the sides of a wine glass or whatever goblet it's going to be around. And so that's why one wing is raised and the other is slightly lower, so that it has a dynamic pose and looks like it's kind of hanging off the side of a cliff. So I get my sculpting tools out and I'm going to go ahead and cut off a piece of clay. And for me, at least, I've found that if I work it for a while and heat it up with my hand, that it's much easier to manipulate and to kind of squish into the form I want. So by rolling it around for, I don't know, it feels like hours, but probably about 2 minutes, it gets to be a nice pliable consistency. Once it's in place, I can cut it as I please. An X-Acto knife goes right through this, making the perfect square, kind of clean cut, crisp edges. And then anywhere that I can't quite reach with the X-Acto knife, I just sort of mush and mesh with these tools. They're basically like rubber nib tools with different shapes on them. And I also have a few clay carving tools that work really well as well. I know this looks bad, but I'm just taking the head off because I don't want to work on the head right now. I like to have it out of the way to focus on sculpting the thinner parts of the body first. It's easier to maneuver around and sculpt pieces that are going to be a little more fragile while the head's not there. Once there's enough clay on the body that I can attach some parts, I give it a leg, and I add a little bit of clay underneath to give it some structure. I do start to add a few pieces and parts here to fill out the body form a little more and provide some muscular detail, as well as providing some fingers for the wings so that I could attach the fleshy parts later. Obviously not real flesh, in clay, but you know, something to give support to that later. I also add some volume and some detail to the back to give it that nice spined look, and then the head can go back on now that it's not really in my way. So I rolled a thin piece of clay out and used that as the skin part of the wing, and I put that in place, cutting off any extra bits that weren't necessary. I wasn't entirely sure what a wing should look like, so I did the best thing I could do, and that was to look up reference photos. Reference photos are extremely important if you're not sure what something's supposed to look like. Guessing usually doesn't come out very well. I also finished up this foot here at the bottom and then moved on to smoothing out some areas. I basically just continue to bulk up any areas that need some more clay and smooth it out, add any details that need to be added, and then move on to the next part. for the dragon's face, I didn't sculpt an entirely detailed face. And the reason why is because this is a golden goblet, and I felt that looking at golden sculptures from the medieval period, some of them weren't as detailed as you would think. And also, the technique I'm going to use after this to turn it gold doesn't quite work well with a lot of detail. I'll explain a little more about that later, but just believe me when I say that I probably could have pushed it further in the detail, but I didn't think it was a good idea. I'm going to give him some facey spikes, and I'm going to add some spines here to the back of the neck, just to give it that Game of Thrones dragon look, smooth it out, and then move on to the next step. Now, I know this looks pretty bad, but what I'm doing is separating the base apart because eventually a glass goblet will need to slide into place, and I can't slide it in with the way that this is built currently. So I have to cut off part of the base so that I can slide the glass bottom in and then put this piece back over. As you can see, it needs to slide in this direction, and with what was there before, I couldn't do it. So finishing up, I'm going to go ahead and attach some more clay to the tail. I'm going to smooth that out, and I'm going to add some fins at the bottom. I really like the designs of the dragons from this new House of Dragons series, and I thought I'd capture a little bit of that in this tail fin here. So yeah, I'll smooth that out, get it looking nice, and move on. I think what inspired me was the thought of a dragon landing on a cliffside and sort of hanging off of it with one of his wings, looking out over a vista. And I thought how cool that would look if it was a goblet instead that it was holding onto. There's a few bits of rock at the bottom to sort of give the notion of the cliffside, but overall the dragon itself is sort of free from hanging onto anything, so you can see more of it. And it also does give the effect that it's hanging onto the glass itself, which is why I sculpted it the way I did. So, pop it in the oven. I believe it goes in at 275 for about 15 minutes or so. Get it nice and cooked, and let it cool. So like I said, I need to be able to add the other part to the bottom to lock it in place whenever I put this on the glass. I didn't make this permanent because, one, I wanted to be able to bake the clay in the oven, and two, I want to be able to put whatever cup can fit in here, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a wine glass. So, you know, I felt like if it could detach, that'd be cool. For this other section, all I did was just sculpted a few more rocks just to continue on with that cliff-like base. By using this plastic wrap, it actually lets you sculpt on top, and then you can separate it apart pretty simply. I went ahead and baked that other section, and then I came back and drilled some holes for some magnets. This way, whenever I slide the two halves together, they can align nicely. Any final trim ups or touch ups are done. Luckily, Sculpey is pretty easy to carve into when it's hardened, as well as sand, and so I go ahead and do that to any edges or surfaces that just don't quite give me the smooth finish I'm going to need for the next step. So, the next step. How am I going to make this gold? I thought about spray painting it gold, I thought about painting it gold, but to me, gold leaf just seemed like the best technique to give me the effect I wanted to go for, which is a solid gold goblet. Now, I've never, ever used gold leaf before. So, like an unexceptional craftsman, I went to the store, got some, and completely bought the wrong stuff. What I got the first time, unfortunately, was not an actual separated piece of gold leaf. It was stuck to the paper, and so it was extremely difficult to get onto the sculpture. If you notice, the second piece here is actually a separate piece of gold leaf. So it's actually a new product I bought, not the original one. It separates off nicely, and I can lay it out perfectly just like this. The initial gold leaf I bought was stuck to the paper, and it was a nightmare to work with. So just be careful when you buy gold leaf if you're going to use it, because man, that's annoying. You'll notice too that I'm spreading this specific glue onto the sculpture, and what it does is it dries, but it dries tacky. So it's actually sticky until you put something on it. And what that allows is for the gold leaf to stick to the surface and bond permanently to that glue. So you're not actually gluing and then sticking on right away. You're gluing, letting the glue dry, and then sticking it to the tacky glue. Now you might notice here and there are some bald spots to the gold leaf. And the reason for that is because gold leaf is not stretchy. And this is why earlier I was talking about the dragon's face being too detailed. Had I made it too detailed, this part would be very difficult. Because gold leaf isn't stretchy, when you put it over a lot of texture, imagine it like going over some mountains and valleys. It's perfectly straight from one mountain peak to the other, but if you try to press down into the valley, it would rip instead of stretch. And that's what's happening here. There's a lot of places where the gold leaf perfectly aligned from one ridge to another, and when I pressed it down with the brush to stick it in place, it tore as it tried to go into the valley of the texture. This isn't a big deal. Overall, it's easy to fix, and gold leaf's pretty forgiving, but it's just one of those things you have to think about before you start using it. So anywhere that was missed, I just went back over with glue once everything else had sort of set in and dry, and I put another section of gold leaf over top. Now gold leaf only sticks to the areas that are sticky, obviously, with the glue, and so anywhere that it doesn't stick, you can actually just basically brush it off and it tears right away. It's super easy to tear, and again, that's a blessing and a curse in this regard, so, just be careful as you go along. And once you're done putting gold leaf everywhere you'd like it, you brush it off with a nice large brush to get rid of any extra pieces, burnishing the gold as you go along, and then you're done. I'm extremely happy with the way this came out. It's not a crazy big project, but it's functional and it looks really cool. It's a little bulky, I'm not gonna lie, but overall, it's what I was going for. I could have gone over it with a wash perhaps to bring out some of the details, but honestly, I didn't really want to show all the details that much. I think what I have here is exactly what I was looking for as far as a gold sculpture, and yeah, I think I'm good to go. Well, if you're still here, I really appreciate it. If you like what you saw, then leave a comment, give it a like, I don't know, do the subscribe thing, whatever it is that YouTube usually tells you to do. And yeah, come back for the next one. We're really excited. I do apologize for my cold. Hopefully it didn't turn too many people off, but next time I should be better. Anyways, hey Ryan, how do we end this again? We really need to find a good way to end these videos. Till next time. I got a gold goblet now.